Yeah, participate in the school budget through the committee. And
Yeah.
a lot of similarities, a little different.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started with the capital budget
You have a lot
so that
more
we can get you out of here on time today.
Flexibility.
Yeah. Well,
So this presentation may look very familiar to some of you. School board is required to do a capital plan every year. We're required to do a 5-year plan. We expanded that to a 10-year plan when we did the sales tax referendum. So every year when we start our capital plan process, as Heather indicated, it never really stops. And we have an advantage that we do have that 10-year plan. So for FY20, I've already got a guideline for the budget. So we've already got a estimated budget for FY20. We'll be updating it based on revenue enrollment projections, project budgets, different things that happen over the course of the year. For example, one of the things I'll point out is we have air conditioners failing faster than we thought. The new high-efficiency units that are put in just don't last as long, so we're having to adjust our budgets accordingly.
How is that high efficiency?
It's supposed to, and I installed one at my house, and I wish I had used a regular one, but it's supposed to save in electricity. But what happens is they're constantly on and off and on and off. They wear out faster. So it's job security for HVAC techs and companies that produce air conditioners. So they're more efficient, but they don't last as long. So those type of things, as they come up.
Dynamic obsolescence.
Yes. They come up and they cause a change in our capital plan from year to year. So the capital plan, again, over 10 years, $5.7 billion. And this breaks it out percentage-wise, and we're going to go through each one of these sections. Now, this is based on what I had in the capital plan for FY19 through 28. We'll be moving that up 1 year, so we're starting that process now. I expect overall the budget 5-year plan is 10-year plan will look very similar in FY20 as it did in FY19. There'll be shifts and changes, but overall I think it's going to be very similar. So we certainly have a lot of construction projects. The ones in italics are the ones that are on the referendum project list. Some are funded from sales tax and some are funded from other sources, but they're on that referendum project list, which means we will be doing those projects. One of the changes that we've dealt with in the last 2 years is waiting for DOE to approve the projects because they have to approve each one. We recently received approval to build the Greater West Palm Lake Worth Area High School, we call that OOO, and the Boca Area Elementary 05C was approved just before our winter break. So we still have one school, the Sunset Palms Middle School, 17 PP, that has not been approved by DOE yet. The other schools have all been approved. Another component is debt service, and the capital budget funds the maintenance transfer that Heather talked about, as well as debt service. So we have money there to pay for the long-term debt, the certificates of participation that's used to build schools and to pay for land for those schools. And then we also have some short-term debt, typically 5 years or less, that is for equipment. We've used that to pay for school buses in the past and to replace chillers, air conditioning units when necessary. And I always put this on, and I know most people aren't interested, but it really does impact the capital budget significantly. This is our long-term borrowing capacity. So the gray bars is the debt service for previously issued debt, and the blue is for proposed, we call new money debt that we'll be issuing. And the red line is 50% of the 1.5 mils, which is what our policy says we'll use for debt service. The green line is 50% of the 2 mils that we used to have. The legislature reduced our taxing authority. So if that was still in place, we have a significant amount of capacity for borrowing and could move construction projects up a lot sooner. We just don't have that ability anymore.
So is that what you borrow the money for, is to be able to build a school quicker?
Rather than save up the money to build a school, OOO, the expected budget for that, I believe, is about $97 million. To build up that money in the budget would take a lot of time. So instead, we borrow for it and pay it off over 25 years, which is over the life of children using the school. Okay. So the schools, typically, we like to borrow in such a way that we're making debt service for about half the life of the useful life of the school.
Is there a certain, though, threshold of debt service that the district can handle, that it's not eating up money for everything else?
Well,
Is there some-
it's always going to eat up money for something else.
Right.
It's money that we could use for air conditioners or computers, but our policy states that no more than half of our capital outlay millage will be used for debt service.
Okay.
State law says that no more than 75%
Okay.
could be used, so we're more conservative than the state allows. And then the other facility projects, and these include the maintenance, which is part of the maintenance transfer, buying land, other projects such as replacing air conditioners, roofs, the tracks, all the different things. And then there's a big line item, facility renewal projects, that's $949 million. That's the sales tax money to pay for the deferred maintenance. So this is all bundled together. This is all the work that we'll be doing, really maintenance, whether it's large projects or small projects. This is everything to maintain our facilities over the next 10 years. And classroom technology and infrastructure, some of this is funded with sales tax. The education technology projects is putting in the large interactive flat panels at our schools. We started rolling those out last year. The schools love them. They're all over Twitter with how they're being used. And that's going to be rolled out so that every classroom eventually has one of those flat panels. I believe they're expected to be done by middle of FY20 or 21. They're trying to get them in as quickly as possible, but there is a training component that goes along with that. We don't want to just load technology into a classroom and a teacher not know how to use it. They are, I think they're nice. You have the big screen and you can show things, but the schools take it to a whole nother level. There's a couple of videos that we've brought in for the Sales Tax Oversight Committee where they show a teacher teaching chemistry, and they actually have a picture of the Bunsen burner and the beaker and dropping different chemicals in and seeing the chemical reaction online. It's amazing what they can do with that technology. So we also have the other technology and maintenance. This is computers. I do expect this line item will go up with the next capital plan. We have a lot of computers where their operating system is no longer going to be supported by Microsoft. So we have to replace a large number of computers during FY20. That's not fully funded in the capital plan right now. So that, along with the air conditioners, are the two big pieces that I expect will see changes as we finalize the capital plan this year. Security projects, of course, there's a component of this in the sales tax as well as in the operating budget. So this is the portion that's in the capital budget. There's also a grant, the security grant that was awarded. We're still waiting for that to be finalized and for that money to be added into the budget. Each year that'll be added in as it's approved. But this is work that'll be done to either maintain or enhance our facilities. This is not paying for police officers. This is hardening the campus. For transportation, that's buying school buses, support vehicles for maintenance, and other departments. A lot of this is replacing very, very old vehicles that are on the roads. So a lot of that is funded with the sales tax, and then we have other dollars as well that are enhancing that. And then the equipment is furniture and equipment as well as maintenance of equipment. And other items, we have some big categories in here. We have the property and flood insurance that can be funded from capital that's in the maintenance transfer. We do have reserves. This is over 10 years, so that number looks very large. A lot of that is actually in the last few years, the capital plan, and I'm certain it won't stay as reserves when you get to year 9 and 10. I just don't know what the issues are going to be in year 9 and 10. So we have room in the budget for that, for unexpected items. And then charter schools. This is something that we're watching because we had $10.4 million that was funded from the state in FY19. For FY20 through 28, we're assuming that the state is not funding it, that we will have to. If the state, as we go through the legislative process, if the state does exactly what the State Board of Education recommended, that frees up about $10.6 million in FY20 and a similar number in each year. So that's if the state funds it, then that money would be going to the air conditioners and the technology, the computers that we know we need to replace. We just won't know how that's going to be used if we're going to get that extra money from the state until the legislative process is complete.
So to get this right, the requirement is that there was a certain pot of money that the legislature funded, and they said in the law that if they don't fund it, then it goes back to the
Right.
local
If
district?
they don't fund it, there also is an amount that has to be increased based on CPI. So it's the amount that was funded in FY19 that will be adjusted based on CPI each year. If the state doesn't fund that, then the district has to fund whatever they don't fund.
And it's also based on a per-student allocation. So it's taking that per-student allocation, so if there is growth, that also has to be covered as well. So there's two different components.
Right. For the
to it.
capital budget, we went the conservative route and assumed the state is not funding it year to year. So that line item is in the budget. There's $104 million over 10 years. If the state does fund it, then that gives us some flexibility. We actually had a lot of discussion on how to do that, and if we wanted to take the risk that the state doesn't fund it, and then we're having to cut something out of the budget, or have a line item expecting that the state won't fund it, and then be able to use it for something else, we decided to go that route. So if the state continues to fund it, then we have an extra $100 million over a 10-year window that can be used for other things. And there's always other things like air conditioners failing and computers that need to be replaced.
Other than that piece, are charter schools then cost neutral to the district?
For the capital budget side, yes, not on the operating budget.
Do you know what they are on the operating budget?
Heather just walked away. Oh, she's right back.
Sorry.
For charter schools, we covered that earlier in the
Yeah.
presentation.
So I'm sorry, what was the question?
And the
Charter schools
operating
are cost
side,
neutral.
are they cost neutral for the operating side?
No, it does depend on, it's difficult to say. I mean, if we're going to end up if they cause the district to have declining enrollment, that's not cost neutral. And, we don't end up you don't lose all the students at one school.
Right.
And so since it's scattered amongst the district, amongst a bunch of different district schools, and the way that we do our allocation based on student enrollment, we're most likely still going to be allocating that teacher out there to that school
Okay,
site.
I guess my question, I guess I didn't word it right, is there an inherent cost to the district for charter schools? Other than, I get the student piece, but other than that, is there any cost to the district that the state requires?
Any additional cost? I mean, it does have a negative impact on the district, and yet there is significant oversight that we have with the charter schools.
But don't you get an administrative fee for that or not?
It's capped, so we get 5% up to the first 250 students. So if a school has 800 students, we're only getting 5% up to the first 250. And then it's also limited based on whether they're high performing. If they're high performing, it's 2% on the first 250. We spend 2 to 3 times the amount on
That's my
administrative
question.
oversight compared to what we actually receive in administrative fee. There is a significant burden. I know on my department, looking at the fiscal oversight of the schools, I find that a lot of the charter schools do not have adequate staff on their side with the management, and which puts an additional burden on specifically my department. I can only speak to the fiscal side of it, but I've seen that, as soon as we start seeing charter schools, especially those large management companies, grow significantly, they're not really staffing up their schools. And another frustration that I have with the charter schools, when we're looking at comparisons to district schools, a lot of times you'll see DOE reports that show the administrative cost of a district school compared to the administrative cost to run a charter school. But DOE is comparing staff. And a lot of these charter schools don't actually hire staff. They have management companies, which is a contracted service. So it looks like it costs very little to manage these charter schools, but that's because they're not including the management fee. So that they're paying to these management companies. So if you really truly look at the administrative cost of a charter school, it's actually much more significant than a district school because they're so much smaller, and we have a lot of the similar overhead, although they do seem to be, at many of the charter schools, lacking sufficient support. There are some great charter schools out there. There really are, that are really doing the right thing within our district, but there are others that we'd have significant challenges with. So sorry to... I am passionate about the amount of time that my staff has to spend on charter schools.
So, is anybody even more concerned now that Richard Corcoran is in charge of the state education
I
department?
mean, that is something that we're definitely monitoring as to whether, what are they looking at for school vouchers? I mean, in the newspaper, there have been several editorials, really stressing that they hope that they continue on the path of supporting public education, put more money into public education, and stop trying to divert it and put it into other aspects and pet projects like the voucher program. We already have such limited funding as it is. When you start just stripping even more out, what are we going to have available? And that's really why we had to go to the voters to locally support Palm Beach County, because we're not getting that support from the state. So we are hopeful. We're going to continue to monitor that we will start to see a shift and a change and more support in our public schools.
I would have agreed until I put Corcoran in there. Sorry.
Okay, the challenges facing the capital budget, it's the uncertainty regarding charter school capital outlay is something we're certainly monitoring. Rising construction costs. We have a lot of construction going on in the state of Florida. Not enough contractors to do the work. So when we're bidding things out, there's not as many companies as we'd like bidding. So that in and of itself causes price escalations. The tariffs are certainly impacting the cost of steel and other materials. All school construction, regardless of how it's funded, is subject to the student station caps, which is a challenge that we're dealing with. So the schools that we're building now are not going to look like the schools we built in the past. The classrooms will be smaller. They're not going to have as many amenities. We're trying to make them as equitable as possible, but the state is mandating how much money we can spend per student to build a school. So that certainly it changes things in how we're construct schools.
What are the amenities? You refer to the amenities, I know, in classroom, the size of the classroom.
Well, the classroom, if you think just the classrooms will be smaller. They're going to be
and you
reduced.
also said
And they're
in
not
your
going to
summary.
have all the closets and the bookshelves and things that were built in. Those are going to have to be just added in as furniture, which means they won't last as long. The schools, the idea of the cost per student station does not allow us to build. They're trying to make sure that what we're building is comparable with what charter schools are building. Our schools are concrete block or poured concrete, and even internal hallways are concrete. In charter schools, it's drywall. So kids can bump up against it, then you have to repair the drywall. So we build typically stronger schools. A lot of our schools are hurricane shelters. We don't have the money to do all those things anymore. We certainly can. There's extraordinary costs that you can add on to that cost cap for hurricane hardening, but it doesn't allow you to necessarily build concrete interiors or to add auditoriums and all the things that we have historically built at our schools. And we're having to go in each project and figure out what we can do. And it's a much more complex process.
For kindergarten classrooms in particular, okay, will those classrooms also, I mean, are you looking at maybe the needs of the particular kindergartners need a lot of room? So are you just looking at all schools, or are you looking at, okay, the particular needs of a particular group of students?
They certainly do look at that, but we don't have the money to build the classrooms as large as we did. So all the classrooms, including kindergarten, will be smaller. They're looking, the way we build our classrooms in the past, they were built to accommodate 30 students or more, and we don't have that because of the number of students can be in a classroom. So kindergarten or classrooms typically are 18 or under, and they've been using these classrooms built for 30 kids. So these classroom sizes are going to go down. It's going to be very different. The new schools are not going to look the way the old ones did. So we've actually had meetings and presentations to principals to try to explain and show what it's going to look like. When we meet with the parents and students, it's the parents and staff, to show them what the drawings of the schools are going to look like. So it's going to be new and shiny and wonderful, but it's not going to be as big as what we used to have. The penalty for violating the law for cost per student station is an equal dollar reduction of the operating budget. And that was bad. Then they eliminate all PICO funding, which is not a significant amount of money for the district, But the third penalty is statewide oversight for all capital expenditures, which mean they would have to approve every item, from property insurance to buying computers to buying air conditioners, would have to be approved at a state level. It's not something we can do. We wouldn't be able to operate that way. And I know my counterparts throughout the state feel the same way. So everyone's trying to figure out how to live with the cost caps and to build the best school we can possibly build, but stay within the maximums allowed by law. All schools have to be, in new schools, additions have to be approved by the state for student capacity. So we were held up on 000 and 05C. We planned to build those 2 years ago, right after the referendum was approved, and they've been held off because we had to wait for DOE approval. So that's something we'll continue to look with. Capital budget overall is a lot bigger than it used to be, but most of it is due to the sales tax, and it's very specifically dedicated to specific projects, much like the operating budget has their referendum with the 1 mil. It's earmarked for specific things, and we have a separate committee that looks at it to make sure we're spending the money in accordance to the promises that we made. I'm going to hand it back to Heather to talk about the timeline.
Yeah, so we're just back to the timeline. We have our next meeting is February 14th. And then from there, we will have another committee meeting April 18th. And that we'll be going over the department budgets and anything remaining from the school budgets that we haven't discussed. Then we'll have our last 2 budget advisory committee meetings. The one will be on June 4th. That's where we'll look at the draft of the report to the board. And then we'll come back on the 13th, and then we would finalize that report to the board. And then the chair of the committee would present at either the July 24th meeting or the July 31st meeting, which is tentative adoption. And then we have our final budget adoption is scheduled for September 4th. So do those meeting dates work for the committee members?
So far.
Valentine's Day.
Mm-hmm.
For us to be out of school.
Yes, and that's something that we've discussed with Mr. Oswald. So we know that there might be principals that are not able to attend on the 14th, and that's acceptable.
June 4th will be my only maybe one, I think, on the list, because that's our normal BCC meeting date.
Okay.
But I'll try not to add anything from my department to the agenda so I can be here.
Okay. All right, so any other questions?
Are we free to share the PowerPoint?
You are free to share the PowerPoint.
And are you going to go through the entire PowerPoint at the high school principals meeting, or
It will be a
condensed
different.
version?
It will be a different presentation for the division meetings,
Okay.
and it will be geared towards each of the different levels.
Got it. Maybe we should happen next week.
Okay, so we do have one more discussion item on the agenda, and it was recommended by the board office. There were changes that they're proposing on the advisory committee policy to the board. So this is the generic policy for all advisory committee members. This isn't something that the committee has to vote on. It was just recommended that we bring it forward as a discussion item for the committee to review the changes being proposed and whether there were any questions or concerns or any input that you wanted to provide. And there really weren't any that I could see significant, substantial
me neither.
changes. So that was the last item on the agenda.
Then we're adjourned? That's it. I don't have to move
Yes.
or anything, so
No, I don't
good.
think so.
Thanks,
Yep.
good. Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, thank you all for attending.